Tattva-jivanam kabibiriditam kalmashapaham. Shravanamangalam Srimadatmatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Burida Janaha. O Lord, the stories of your divine acts are an embodiment of nectar which brings life and hope to the people suffering from the pain of separation. The wise Mahatmas, the devoted poets, have all sung its praises. By mere listening to them, it removes the sins and sufferings and bestows the supreme bliss and welfare as well. So we will be doing a reading from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I was asked sort of at the last minute to do this, so I just opened the book and found a page, and we're going to start from there. But first, I just wanted to say the book, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, is my favorite book. It's a book about spiritual life, how to realize God. And it is said that when M first met Sri Ramakrishna, he was in a very depressed state of mind. Many people also have found that they go through some difficulty before they become really interested in spiritual life. And the gospel gives example of this in many ways, because many people who read this find that their lives are transformed. It is Sri Ramakrishna speaking to his intimate disciples, and it's a joyful book. This is the wonderful thing about it, that the more you read it, the more you realize that they're all laughing and it's full of joy, and you get deeper and deeper into it as you read, and you find that it has layers and layers of different meanings, partly having to do with where you are, but also just in the work itself, it does. M, as I said, was suffering greatly. His family was very disturbed. And the first time he saw Sri Ramakrishna, he went with his nephew, who took him to Dakshineswar. And he was actually contemplating suicide at the time. And so he wasn't very interested in anything, but his nephew said, there's a holy man that lives there, let's go see him. So they went, and they ended up right outside Sri Ramakrishna's room. And at this time, that was the first time that M saw Sri Ramakrishna. And he said he felt like it was Chaitanya with all his devotees around him. He immediately recognized him for what he was and felt attracted. He didn't actually talk to him this time. He went back, but it changed his life and his whole attitude. When I picture him there, with this first view that he had, you can understand the transformation that must have come over him, because he was in this very depressed state of mind. So he went home, but it wasn't long before he returned. And then this gospel was written as a record of his different meetings with Sri Ramakrishna. And it was written kind of piecemeal, actually. Some of it he didn't write till years after the master had passed away. But everything that he wrote, he meditated on and tried to get the exact words of Sri Ramakrishna and how it was. And in fact, sometimes he said that he would get something down, and then he would hear the master telling him, no, that's not what I said this. So that he actually was getting an input directly from Sri Ramakrishna. And Swamiji and Holy Mother, all the direct disciples, say this is just a wonderful book, and it was the actual words of Sri Ramakrishna. And it as I said, it's very joyful, and when you read it, you see how happy they were. I think it was Shantamananda once gave an example of how Swami Chiriyananda was in the Belar Mat, and all the young brahmacharis were off somewhere, he couldn't see them. And they were all laughing and carrying on, and he got kind of offended because he thought it was too much gaiety going on. So he went and he said, "What, have you realized, God, that you're laughing so loud?" And they all, of course, were very quiet. And one of them said, "But when we read the gospel, we see that you too were laughing. Everyone was laughing." And he said, "Yes, that's right, we were. Go ahead." Because it was just full of joy. And you do see that when you read it, that it's not just, they weren't in an ordinary state of mind. So what I opened up to was the Durga Puja festival. It's chapter 29, and it took place Friday, September 26th, 1884. Sri Ramakrishna had come to Calcutta. It was the first day of the Durga Puja, the great religious festival, and the Hindus of the metropolis were celebrating it. The master intended to visit the image of the Divine Mother at Adar's house. He also wanted to see Shivanath, the Brahmo devotee. It was about midday. Umbrella in hand, M was pacing the footpath in front of the Brahmo Samaj temple. 2 hours had passed, but the master had not yet appeared. Now and then, M sat down on the steps of Dr. Mahal Nash's dispensary and watched the joy and mirth of the people, young and old, who were celebrating the puja. A little after 3, the master's carriage drove up, and as soon as Ramakrishna stepped out, he saluted the temple of the Brahmo Samaj with folded hands. Hazra and a few other devotees were with him. M bowed before the master and took the dust of his feet. The master told him he was going to Shivanath's house. A few minutes later, members of the Brahmo Samaj came and took him to Shivanath's. But Shivanath was not at home. Shortly after, Vijay Goswami and several other Brahmo leaders greeted the master and took him inside the Brahmo temple. Sri Ramakrishna was in a happy mood. He was given a seat below the altar. There, the Brahmo devotees sang their devotional music. Vijay and the Brahmo devotees sat in front of the master to Vijay with a smile. "I was told that you'd put up a signboard here that people belonging to other faiths are not allowed to come in. Narendra, too, said to me, you shouldn't go to the Brahmo Samaj, you'd better visit Shivanath's house. But I say we are all calling on the same God. Jealousy and malice need not be. Some say that God is formless, and some that God has form. I say, let one man meditate on God with form if he believes in form, and let another meditate on the formless deity if he does not believe in form. What I mean is that dogmatism is not good. It's not good to feel that my religion alone is true and that other religions are false. The correct attitude is this: my religion is right, but I do not know whether other religions are right or wrong, true or false. I say this because one cannot know the true nature of God unless one realizes him. Kabir used to say, God with form is my father. The formless is my father. The one with form is my father also. Which can I blame? Which shall I praise? The two pans of the scale are equally heavy. Hindu, Muslims, Christians, Shaktas, Shaivas, Vaishnavas, the Brahmagyanis of the time of the Rishis, and you, the Brahmagyanis of modern times, all seek the same object, The mother prepares dishes to suit the stomachs of the family. She doesn't cook pulao and kai lai for all of them. All have not the same power of digestion. So she prepares a simple stew for some, but she loves her children equally. I was just going to mention that Sri Ramakrishna, when he says this about everyone's calling on the same God, that God with form is my mother and the formless is my father. He's telling them that they need to be more open toward other people, because the Brahma Samaj at that time didn't believe in worshiping images, and they had a stigma attached to people who did worship in that way. And when other people would go to those people, then they would get sort of on the black books, and there actually became a split in it between Shivanath's thing and Vijaya's later in the Brahma Samaj. Do you know my attitude? I love all the preparations of fish. I have a womanly nature. I feel myself at home with every dish. Fried fish, fish cooked with turmeric powder, pickled fish, and further, I equally relish rich preparations like fish head and pulao. Everybody laughed. So he's saying that he practices all the different ways, with form, without form, and all the different religions. Do you know what the truth is? God has made different religions to suit different aspirants, times, and countries. All doctrines are only so many paths, but a path is by no means God himself. Indeed, one can reach God if one follows any of the paths with wholehearted devotion. Suppose there are errors in religion that one has accepted. If one is sincere and earnest, then God himself will correct those errors. Suppose a man is set out with a sincere desire to visit Jagannath at Puri, and by mistake he's gone north instead of south. Then certainly someone meeting him on the way will tell him, "My good fellow, don't go that way, go to the south." And the man will reach the Jagannath sooner or later. If there are errors in other religions, that's none of our business. God, to whom the world belongs, takes care of that. Our duty is to somehow visit Jagannath, to the Brahmas. You hold the view, the view that you hold is good indeed. You describe God as formless, and that is fine. One may eat cake with icing, either straight or sidewise. It will taste sweet either way. But dogmatism is not good. You have no doubt heard the story of the chameleon. A man entered a wood and saw a chameleon on a tree. He reported to his friends, "I've seen a red lizard." He was firmly convinced that it was nothing but red. Another person, after visiting the tree, said, "I've seen a green lizard." He was firmly convinced that it was nothing but green. But the man who lived under the tree said, "What both of you have said is true, but the fact is that the creature is sometimes red, sometimes green, sometimes yellow, and sometimes it has no color at all." God has been described in the Vedas as both with attributes and without. You describe him as without form only. That is one-sided. But never mind, if you know one of his aspects truly, you will be able to know his other aspects too. God himself will tell you about them. He pointed then to 2 or 3 of the devotees who were there, and he said, "Those who come to your Samaj know both this gentleman and that." Vijay still belonged to the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. He was a salaried preacher of that organization, but he couldn't obey all its rules and regulation. He mixed with those who believed in God with form, and this was creating a misunderstanding between him and the Brahmo authorities. Many Brahmos disapproved of his conduct, and the master suddenly looked at Vijay and began to talk directly to him. Master, to Vijay, smiling, I understand they've been finding fault with you for mixing with those who believe in God with form. Is that true? He who is a devotee of God must have an understanding that cannot be shaken by any conditions. He must be like the anvil in a blacksmith's shop. It is constantly being struck by the hammer. Still, it's unshaken. Bad people may abuse you very much and speak ill of you, but you must bear with them if you sincerely seek God. Is it possible to think of God in the midst of the wicked? Just think of the rishis of ancient times. They used to meditate on God in the forest, surrounded on all sides by tigers, bears, and other ferocious beasts. Wicked men have the nature of tigers and bears. They will pursue you and do you injury. One must be very careful about these few things. First, an influential man who has much money and many men under his control, he can injure you if he wants to. You have to be careful when talking to him. Perhaps you have to approve of what he says. Second, a dog. When it chases you or barks at you, you have to stand still and talk to it gently and pacify it. Third, a bull. If it runs after you with lowered horns, you must calm it with a gentle voice. Fourth, a drunkard. If you arouse his anger, he will abuse you, naming 14 generations of your family. You should say to him, "Hello, uncle, how are you?" Then he will be mightily pleased and sit by you and smoke. In the presence of a wicked person, I become alert. Such a man asks me whether I have a pipe for smoking. I say, yes, I have. Some people have the nature of a snake. They will bite you without warning. You have to discriminate a great deal in order to avoid the bite. Otherwise, your passions will be stirred up to such an extent that you will feel like doing an injury in return. This is sort of an interesting point that he's making, that we all, if you're hurt, sometimes you want to respond. It's sort of a natural thing to do, and you have to really discriminate in order to overcome that. The companionship of a holy man is greatly needed now and then. It enables one to discriminate between the real and the unreal. So he's saying that through the company of the holy, you can overcome these passions and wanting to respond to things that are external, that are unreal. Vijay, I have no time, sir. I'm entangled in my duties here. Master, you are a religious teacher. Others have holidays, but not so a religious teacher. When the manager of an estate brings order to one part of it, the landlord sends him to another part. So you have no leisure at all. Everybody laughed. Vijay with folded hands, Sir, please give me your blessing. Master, now you are talking like an ignorant person. It is God alone who blesses. Vijay, revered Sir, please give us some instruction. The master glanced around the Brahma temple and said with a smile, this is nice too, a mixture of crystals and syrup. That is to say, a mixture of worldly and spiritual ideals. The allusion is to the practice of keeping molasses in an earthen jar with a small hole at the bottom. The watery part slowly leaks out and the crystals are formed inside. There are crystals and there is syrup too. I have scored too many points and therefore I'm out of the game. Everybody laughed. Do you know about the game called Knacks? It's a game of cards, and anyone scoring above 17 is out of the game. Those who score fewer points, say 5, 7, or 10, are very clever. I've scored too many, and I'm out of the game. Once Keshav Sen gave a lecture at his house. I was present. Many people were there. The ladies were seated behind the screen. Keshav, in the course of his talk, said, "Oh God, please bless us that we may dive and disappear altogether in the river of bhakti." I said to Keshav with a smile, "If you disappear altogether in the river of bhakti, then what will be the fate of those behind the screen? By all means dive into the river, but you'd better come back to dry land now and then. Don't disappear in the river altogether." At these words, Keshav and the others burst out laughing. This is the kind of thing he would do. He would poke fun at people and make them laugh at themselves. But also he was teaching as he did this. There was never any malice in it. Never mind. One can realize God in the world too, if only one is sincere. I and mine, that's ignorance. But, O God, thou and thine, that's knowledge. Live in the world like a maidservant in a rich man's house. She performs all the household duties, brings up her master's child, and speaks of him as my Hari. But in her heart, she knows quite well that neither the house nor the child belong to her. She performs all her duties, but just the same, her mind dwells in her native place. Likewise, do your duties, but fix your mind on God, and know that house, family, and son do not belong to you. They are God's. You are only his servant. I ask people to renounce mentally. I do not ask them to give up the world. If one lives in the world unattached and seeks God with sincerity, then one is able to attain him. To Vijay. There was a time when I too would meditate on God with my eyes closed. That's an allusion to the way that the Brahmo Samaj people meditated. Then I said to myself, does God exist only when I think of him with my eyes closed? Doesn't he exist when I look around with my eyes open? Now when I look around with my eyes open, I see that God dwells in all beings. He is the indwelling spirit in all men, animals, and other living beings, trees and plants, sun, moon, land and water. Why do I seek Shivanath? He who meditates on God for many days has substance in him. Further, he who sings very well, plays well on a musical instrument, or has mastered any one art, has in him real substance and the power of God. This is the view of the Gita. It is said in the Chandi that he who is endowed with physical beauty has in him substance and the power of God. To Vijay, ah, what a beautiful nature Kedar has. No sooner does he come to meet me than he bursts into tears. His eyes are always red, and they swim in tears like a chanavara in syrup. Vijay. At Dhaka, he is constantly talking about you. He is always eager to see you. Sri Ramakrishna was about to depart. The Brahmo devotees bowed low before him, and he returned their salute. Then getting into the carriage, he set out for Adar's house to see the image of the Divine Mother. It was the day of the Mahastami, the most auspicious day in the worship of Durga, the Divine Mother. Sunday, September 28, 1884. At Adar's invitation, Sri Ramakrishna had come to Calcutta to see the holy image at his house. Before going there, he went to Ram's. Many devotees, including Narendra, Balaram, M, Niranjan, Vijay, Kedar, Ram, Surendra, were present. Balaram and Rakal were still at Vrindavan. Master, looking at Vijay and Kedar with a smile, "This is a nice reunion today. You two have the same spiritual mood." To Vijay, "Well, what about Shivanath? Did you..." Vijay, "Yes, sir. He heard that you'd been to his house. I haven't seen him, but I sent him word. He knows about it." Master, to Vijay and the others, "4 desires have come into my mind. I shall eat fish curry cooked with eggplant. I shall visit Shivanath. The devotees will repeat the name of Hari over their beads, and I shall watch them. And the Tantric devotees will drink consecrated wine, 8 annas worth, on the Astami day, and I shall watch them and salute them." Narendra was seated in front of the Master. He was about 22 years old. While Sri Ramakrishna was talking thus, his eyes fell on his beloved disciple. At once the Master stood up and went into samadhi. He placed one foot on Narendra's knee. He was in a deep spiritual mood. His eyes were unblinking, his mind completely unconscious of the outer world. After a long time, he came down to the relative plane of consciousness. But he still appeared dazed, for the intoxication of divine bliss had not altogether left him. Speaking to him in that ecstatic state, he repeated the name of God. He said, "Satchidananda, Satchidananda, Satchidananda." Shall I repeat that? No, it's the day of the Divine Mother, the giver of bliss, of divine inebriation. O Mother, full of bliss, of divine inebriation. Sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni. It's not good to keep the voice on ni. It's not possible to keep it there for very long. I shall keep it on the next lower note. These are the notes in the singing. There are different planes of consciousness: the gross, the subtle, the causal, the great cause. Entering the Mahakarana, the great cause, one becomes silent and cannot utter a word. But an Ishvara Koti, after attaining the great cause, can come down again to the lower planes. Incarnations of God and others like them belong to the class of Ishvara Kotis. They can climb up and they can also come down. They climb to the roof and they can come down again by the stairs and move on the lower floor. It's a case of negation and affirmation. There is, for instance, the 7-story palace of a king. Strangers have access only to the lower apartments, but the prince, who knows the palace to be his own, can move up and down from floor to floor. There's a kind of a rocket that throws out sparks in one pattern, and then it seems to go out. And after a moment, it makes another pattern, and then still another. Yet there's no end to the patterns it can make. But then there's a kind of rocket that, when it is lighted, makes only a dull sound, and it throws out a few sparks and then goes out altogether. Like this second kind are the ordinary jivas. After much spiritual effort, they can go to a higher plane, but they can't come down to tell others about their experience. After much effort, he may go into samadhi, but he can't climb down from that state or tell others what he has seen there. There is a class of devotees, the Nitya Siddhas, the ever-perfect. From their very birth, they seek God. They do not enjoy anything of the world. The Vedas speak of the Homa bird. It lives very high up in the sky. There the mother bird lays her eggs. She lifts so high that the egg falls for many days, and while falling it is hatched. The chick continues to fall. That also goes on for many days, and in the meantime, the chick develops its eyes. Coming nearer to the earth, it becomes conscious of the world. It realizes it will meet with certain death if it hits the ground. Then it gives a shrill cry and shoots upward toward its mother. The earth means death, and it frightens the young bird. It then seeks its mother. She dwells high up in the sky, and the young bird shoots straight up in that direction. It doesn't look anywhere else. Those who are born as the companions of an incarnation of God are eternally perfect. For some of them, that birth is the last. To Vijay, you have both, yoga and boga. King Janaka also had yoga and boga. Therefore, he's called a Rajarsi, both king and seer. Narada was a Devarshi, and Sukdeva was a Brahmarshi. Yes, Sukadeva was a Brahmarshi. He was not a mere jnani. He was the very embodiment of jnana, divine knowledge. Whom do I call a jnani? A man who has attained knowledge and has done so after much effort. Sukdeva was the very image of knowledge. In other words, a form of concentrated knowledge. He had attained knowledge spontaneously, without any labor. Saying this, Sri Ramakrishna came down into a normal mood, and then he talked freely with the devotees. The master asked Kedar to sing. Kedar sang. How shall I open my heart, O friend? It is forbidden me to speak. I am about to die for the lack of a kindred soul to understand my misery. Kedar sang several other songs. After the music, the master again talked to the devotees. Nandalal, Keshav's nephew, was also present with a few of his Brahmo friends. They were sitting near to the master. The master, to Vijaya and other devotees. A man brought a bottle of consecrated wine for me, but I couldn't even touch it. Vijay, Master, I became intoxicated in the mere thought of God. I don't have to take any wine. I feel drunk at the very sight of the charamrita. I feel as if I had drunk 5 bottles of liquor. When a person attains such a state, he cannot help discriminating about food. That's the water which has been offered to the deity. Narendra, as regards food, one should take whatever comes. Master, what you say applies only to a particular state of the aspirant's mind. No food can harm a jnani. According to the Gita, the jnani himself doesn't eat. His eating is an offering to the Kundalini, but that does not apply to a bhakta. The present state of my mind is such that I can't eat any food unless it is first offered to God by a Brahmin priest. Formerly, my state of mind was such that I would enjoy inhaling the smell of the burning corpses carried by the wind from the other side of the Ganges. It tasted very sweet to me. But nowadays I can't eat food touched by anybody and everybody. No, I cannot. But once in a while, I do. One day I was taken to see a performance of a play at Keshav's house. They gave me luchis and curries to eat. I didn't know whether the food was handed to me by a washerman or a barber or anyone else. I ate quite a little bit. Everybody laughs. Rakal had asked me to eat. To Narendra, with you it's all right. You are in this as well as that. You can eat everything now. To the devotees, blessed is he who feels longing for God, though he eats pork. What shame on him whose mind dwells on woman and gold, even though he eats the purest food, boiled vegetables, rice, and ghee. I once had the desire to eat dal cooked at a blacksmith's house. From my childhood, I'd heard the blacksmith say, "Do the Brahmins know how to cook?" I ate the dal, but it smelt of blacksmith. He laughed. I received the alamatra from Govinda Rai. Rice was cooked for me with onions in the kuti. I ate some. I ate curry in Mani Malak's garden house. When I went to Kamarpukur, Ramlal's father was frightened. He thought I might eat at everybody's house, and he was frightened to think I might be expelled from the caste, so I couldn't stay very long. I came away. Both the Vedas and the Puranas describe pure food and conduct, but what the Vedas and the Puranas ask people to shun as impure is extolled by the Tantra as good. Oh, what a state of mind I passed through. I would open my mouth, touching as it were the heavens and nether worlds with my jaws, and utter the word ma. I felt that I had seized the mother like a fisherman dragging a fish in his net. Let me recite a song. This time I shall devour thee utterly, Mother Kali, for I was born under an evil star, and one born so becomes, they say, the eater of his mother. Thou must devour me first, or I shall eat thee up. One or the other it's got to be.
What does that mean?
It goes on. I shall besmear my hands with black, and with black my face, and with black I shall besmear the whole of my body, and when death seizes me, with black I shall besmear his face. It's like the worship of the terrible, that concept. And he says further, O mother, I shall eat thee up, but not digest thee. I shall install thee in my heart, and make thee offerings with my mind. You may say that by eating Kali I shall embroil myself with Kala, her husband, but I'm not afraid. Braving his anger, I shall chant my mother's name to show the whole world that Ram Prasad is Kali's rightful son. Come what may, I shall eat thee up, thee and thy retinue, or lose my life attempting it. So it's like consuming the whole thing into your very being. I became almost mad, such was my longing for God. Narendra began to sing, O mother, make me mad with thy love. What need have I of knowledge or reason? Listening to the song, the master again went into samadhi. Coming down to the normal plane, he assumed the attitude of Giri Rani and sang the Agami. That's the mother of Parvati. And the Agami is one of the songs that has to do with Durga Puja. He sang intoxicated with divine love. Tell me, my Uma, how have you fared alone in the stranger's house? He said to the devotees, today is the Mahastami. The mother has come. That is why I feel such an awakening of spiritual emotion. Kedar, Lord, you are here. Are you different from the Divine Mother? Sri Ramakrishna looked in another direction and sang in an absent-minded mood, Ah, friend, I have not found him yet, whose love has driven me mad. Then he became ecstatic and sang of the Divine Mother. As he sang, Vijay suddenly stood up, crying the name of Hari. Sri Ramakrishna, full of divine love, began to dance with Vijay and the other devotees. The music was over. The master, Vijay, Narendra, and the other devotees sat down. All eyes were fixed on Sri Ramakrishna, who began conversing with the devotees. He asked about their health. Kedar spoke to him humbly in a soft voice. Narendra, Chunilal, Ram, M, and Harish were sitting by the master. Kedar humbly, "How can I get rid of my dizziness?" Master tenderly, "One gets that. I've had it myself. Use a little almond oil. I've heard that it cures dizziness." Kedar, "I shall, sir." Master to Chunilal, "Hello, how is everything?" Chunilal, "Everything's all right with us now. Balaram Babu and Rakal are well at Vrindavan." Master, "Why have you sent so many sweetmeats? Wait a day or two before coming to Dakshineswar. You're not well. You may fall ill again." To Narayana tenderly, "Sit here. Sit by me. Come to Dakshineswar tomorrow and have your meal there." Pointing to M, "Come with him." To M, "What do you say?" M wanted to accompany Sri Ramakrishna to Dakshineswar that very day. He became very thoughtful. So does anybody have any questions now? If they do, all right, we'll go forward. Surendra stood near Ramakrishna. He was in the habit of drinking, and he often went to excess. This had worried the master greatly, but he had not asked Surendra to give up drinking altogether. He'd said to him, "Look here, Surendra, whenever you drink wine, offer it beforehand to the Divine Mother. Seeing that your brain does not become clouded, that you don't reel, the more you think of the Divine Mother, the less you will like to drink. The Mother is the giver of the bliss of divine inebriation. Realizing her, one feels a natural bliss." The master looked at Surendra and said, "You've had a drink." With these words, he went into samadhi. It was dusk. Retaining partial consciousness, the master sang, "Behold my mother, playing with Shiva, lost in an ecstasy of joy. Drunk with the draught of celestial wine, she reels, and yet she does not fall." Then he chanted the name of Hari, clapping his hands occasionally. In a sweet voice he said, "Hari, Hari, O mind, chant the name of Hari, sing the name of Hari." Then he chanted, "Rama, Rama, Rama." Now the master began to pray. O Rama, I am without devotion and austerity, without knowledge and love. I have not performed any religious rites. O Rama, I have taken refuge in thee. I have taken shelter at thy feet. I do not want creature comforts. I do not seek name and fame. O Rama, I do not crave the 8 occult powers. I do not care for 100 occult powers. I am thy servant. I have taken refuge in thee. Grant, O Rama, that I may have pure love for thy lotus feet, that I may not in any way be deluded by thy world-bewitching Maya. O Rama, I have taken refuge in thee. As the master prayed, all eyes were turned toward him, hearing his piteous voice. Few could restrain their tears. Ramchandra Datta came in and stood near him. Master, where have you been, Ram? Ram, I was upstairs, sir. Ram had been making arrangements for feeding the devotees on the roof of the house. Master to Ram with a smile, isn't it better to stay down below than to be high up? Water accumulates on low land, but flows down from a high mound. Ram with a smile. That is true, sir. Supper was ready on the roof. Sri Ramakrishna and the devotees were taken there and sumptuously fed. Later, the master went to Adar's house with M, Naranjan, and the others. The Divine Mother was being worshipped there. It had been Adar's earnest prayer that on this sacred day, Sri Ramakrishna might bless his house with his presence. Monday, September 29th, 1884. It was the third day of Durga Puja. The master had been awake in his room at Dakshineswar since early morning. The morning worship in the Kali temple was over, and the orchestra had played the morning melodies in the Nahavat. Brahmins and gardeners, basket in hands, were plucking flowers for the worship of the Divine Mother. Bhavanath, Babaram, Naranjan, and M had spent the night at Dakshineswar, sleeping on the porch of the master's room. As soon as they awoke, they saw Sri Ramakrishna dancing in an ecstatic mood. He was chanting, "Victory to Mother Durga. Hallowed be the name of Durga." He was naked and looked like a child as he chanted the name of the blissful Mother. After a few moments, he said, "Oh, the bliss of divine ecstasy. Oh, the bliss of divine drunkenness." Then he repeatedly chanted the name Govinda. "Oh, Govinda, my life, my soul." The devotees sat on their beds with unwinking eyes and watched. Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual mood. Hazara was living at the temple garden. Latu, Ramakrishna, was also living there to render the master personal service. Rakal was still at Vrindavan, and Narendra visited. Sri Ramakrishna, now and then, he was expected that day. The devotees watched their faces. Master took his seat on a mat on the northern veranda. Bhavanath and M sat beside him, and other devotees were coming in and out of the room. Master to Bhavanath, "The truth is that ordinary men cannot easily have faith, but an Ishwara Koti's faith is spontaneous." Prahlada burst into tears while writing the letter Ka. It reminded him of Krishna. It is the nature of jivas to doubt. They say yes, no doubt. But Hazara can never be persuaded to believe that Brahma and Shakti and the being endowed with Shakti, are one and the same. When the reality appears as creator, preserver, destroyer, we call it Shakti. When it is inactive, we call it Brahman. But really, it is one and the same thing, indivisible. Fire naturally brings to mind its power to burn, and the idea of burning naturally brings to mind the idea of fire. It is impossible to think of the one without the other. So I prayed to the Divine Mother, "O Mother, Hazara is trying to upset the views of this place, either give him right understanding or take him away from here." The next day he came to me and said, "Yes, I agree with you." He said that God exists everywhere, all-pervading consciousness. Bhavanath, smiling, "What did Hazara say really to make you suffer so much?" Master, "You see, I'm now in a different mood. I can't shout and carry on heated discussions with people. I'm not in a mood now to argue and quarrel with Hazara." Hriday said to me at Jadu Malik's garden house, "Uncle, don't you want to keep me with you?" "No," I said, "I'm no longer in a mood to get into heated arguments with you." What is knowledge and what is ignorance? A man is ignorant so long as he feels God is far away. He has knowledge when he knows that God is here and everywhere. When a man has true knowledge, he feels that everything is filled with consciousness. At Kamarpukur, I used to talk to Shibu, who was then a lad of 4 years old. When the clouds rumbled and lightnings flashed, Shibu would say to me, "Look there, uncle, they're striking matches again." Everybody laughs. One day I noticed him chasing grasshoppers by himself, and the leaves rustled in the nearby trees. "Hush, hush," he said to the leaves. "I want to catch the grasshoppers." He was a child, and he saw everything as throbbing with consciousness. One cannot realize God without the faith and that knows no guile, the simple faith of a child. What a state of mind I passed through. One day something bit me while I was sitting in the grass, and I was afraid it might have been a snake. I didn't know what to do. I'd heard if a snake bites you again immediately after the first bite, it takes back its own venom. And once I set out to discover the hole to see if the snake would bite me again. While I was searching, a man said to me, "What are you doing?" After listening to my story, he said, "But a snake must bite in the very same place it's bitten before." Thereupon I went away. Perhaps I'd been bitten by a scorpion or some other insect. I had heard from Ramlal that the autumn chill was good for one's health. Ramlal had quoted verses to support it. One day I was returning from Calcutta in a carriage, and I stuck my head out of the window so that I might get all the chill. Then I fell sick. Everybody laughs. Sri Ramakrishna entered his room and sat down. His legs were a little swollen. He asked the devotees to feel his legs and see whether the pressure that their fingers would make dimples. Dimples did appear with pressure, but the devotees said it was nothing. Master to Bhavanath, please ask Mahendra of Sinti to come to me. I shall feel better if he reassures me. Bhavanath with a smile, you have great faith in medicine, but we haven't so much. Master, it is God who, as the doctor, prescribes the medicine. It is he who in one form has become the physician. Dr. Ganga Prasad asked me not to drink water at night. I regarded his statement as the words of the Vedas. I look upon him as the physician of heaven. Hazra entered the room and sat down. The master talked a while about different things and then said to Hazra, you see, many people were at Ram's house yesterday. Vijay, Kedar, and others were there. But why did I feel so deeply stirred at the sight of Narendra? I found that Kedar belonged to the realm of divine inebriation. Presently, Narendra arrived and Sri Ramakrishna was exceedingly happy. Narendra saluted the master and began to talk with Bhavanath and others. M was seated nearby. A long mat was spread on the floor, and while talking, Narendra lay on the mat on his stomach. The master looked at him and suddenly went into samadhi. He sat on Narendra's back in an ecstatic mood. Bhavanath sang, O mother, ever blissful as thou art, do not deprive thy worthless child of thy bliss. So Ramakrishna came down from the plane of samadhi and he sang, repeat, O mind, my mother Durga's hallowed name. O Gauri, O Narayani, to thee I bow. Thou art the day, O mother, thou art the dusk and the night. As Rama, thou drawest the bow. As Krishna, thou playest the flute. As Kali all terrible, thou hast silenced Shiva, thy Lord. The 10 embodiments of the divine Shakti art thou, and thou art the 10 avatars. This time save me, thou must. With flowers and bilva leaves did Yashoda worship thee, and thou did bless her by placing Krishna, the child, in her arms. Wherever I chance to live, O mother, in forest or grove, may my mind day and night dwell at thy lotus feet, whether at last I die a natural or a sudden death. O may my tongue repeat Durga's name at the end. Thou mayst send me away, O mother, but where shall I go? Tell me, mother, where else shall I hear so sweet a name? Thou mayst even say to me, step aside, go away. Yet I shall cling to thee, O Durga, unto thy feet. As thy anklets I shall cling, making their tinkling sound. When, O Mother, thou sittest at mighty Shiva's side, then I shall cry from thy feet, victory to Shiva. Mother, when as the kite thou soarest in the sky, there in the water beneath the minnows I shall be swimming. Upon me wilt thou pounce and pierce me through with thy claws. Thus, when the breath of life forsakes me in thy grip, do not deny me the shelter of thy lotus feet. From the world's bondage, free me, O spouse of the Absolute. I think we can stop there. So we'll move the chant. Oh, are there questions? Okay. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is he still the same.